Recently, I've come back to reading some of the works of one of my greatest teachers, and that is the sage Paramahansa Yogananda. Yogananda was an Indian monk who came to the West in the very early 20th century and established a foundation in America and ultimately became one of the most influential teachers of yogic wisdom in the West, meditation and other yogic techniques known as Kriya Yoga, which he helped spread to the West and was really all about bringing the path of yoga, which means union with the divine, bringing the path of yoga to ordinary people, not just people in a temple, people who've devoted their lives to their spiritual path, but people who've got to deal with the stuff of everyday life. How to become and really discover yourself, despite the fact of having to deal with all the stresses and strains and jobs and everything that our lives are actually full of. His autobiography, The Autobiography of a Yogi, is considered one of the most important spiritual classics of all time and has been profoundly influential in many people's lives, including my own. For me, one of the most important spiritual books I ever read. And famously, Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple Computers, read that book every year and ensured that after his memorial service, after he died, everyone who was there was given a copy of the Autobiography of a Yogi as they left. When it comes to Yogananda's yoga for the householder, whether he's speaking about relationships, whether he's speaking about children and dealing with children, more often when he's talking about the habits and challenges and trials and tribulations of modern life that we all face, he keeps on coming back to one thing, what he calls self-realization, knowing our true nature as divine beings, knowing who the self really is. Realization is not only realizing as an intellectual experience, but making real, making the self real. He said, self-realization is the knowing in mind, body, and soul that we are one with the omnipresence of God, that we do not have to pray that it comes to us, that we are not merely near it at all times, but that God's omnipresence is our omnipresence, that we are just as much of that now as we will ever be. All we have to do is improve our knowing. So contrary to what we are so often taught, especially in the West, that we must reach towards the divine, we're down there, and that's over there, and there's this separation that we, I guess, express in the original story of the Four, that says we're separated from the divine. That is the great error, not knowing that we and the divine are one and the same. And that is expressed knowing in our consciousness. For us, it's all about consciousness, which is located in the mind. He says, do you ever think that you've been completely unsettled by circumstances, ruffled, shattered, whipped, lacking in willpower and how to deal with them? Banish such thoughts. You have power. You just don't use it. You have all the power you need. There is nothing greater than the power of the mind. When it comes to fear, I'm talking about the all-encompassing fear that is about dealing with life, from actual fears, the things we are afraid of, to having to deal with the stresses and strains, the fears and challenges of life. And Yogananda's philosophy was essentially twofold. On the one hand, we have to learn how to calm ourselves. And on the other hand, we have to face the fears. The basic idea is look fear in the face and it will cease to trouble us. The great Western philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson said, it's easy to conquer fear. Always, 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 always Do what you are afraid of. That's a quote, the five alwayses. Do what you are afraid to do. Approach our fears rather than avoid our fears. And it is that approach of confronting fear directly that actually shifts how we respond to it. One of the other great teachers I often speak about here is Eknath Iswaran. And he tells a story where he says, I complained about it to my spiritual teacher, my grandmother. She was a very plain-spoken fear, with none of the euphemisms of the intellectual. So she simply led me to a nearby amla tree. The amla is a beautiful tree, a little bit like a mimosa, he says, with a small fruit. She picked a fruit and said, here, take a bite. I started chewing. It was pretty awful. I said, I've got to spit it out, Granny. It's sour, bitter, unpleasant. She just said, bear with me. Keep chewing it for a while. So I went on chewing, and to my surprise, the amla fruit began to get sweeter and sweeter. Similarly, meditation and the yogic disciplines require sustained enthusiasm every day, even when it seems icky, especially when it seems icky. He says, if you keep at it, you will find those same disciplines becoming sweeter and sweeter. When meditation times comes around, you will find yourself hungering for the inner peace and calm that it brings. The time will even come when you want to double helping. We certainly all know that to be true of taste, how we develop a taste for things and how our initial impression of bitterness or sourness often turns out to shift and we start craving the thing we initially despised. Interestingly, it's not absolutely true for everything, but you learn about yourself when you find out the things it is true for. For example, if you go to gym every day, some people will find it becomes addictive. Some people, every single time it's a challenge, every single time they've got to persuade themselves to do it because the reward isn't there. With the meditation, the reward is the calmness and the peace and the subsequent ability to face whatever life has to offer. Now, gym may very well do that. Something else might do it for someone else. Each of us will learn by discovering how does it make us feel. But the point here with meditation is that's the approach that we can take to calming ourselves and finding that inner peace that allows us to confront those things which we fear. Even science really agrees that the confrontational approach is beneficial to us. Just like I'll eat the thing that is bitter until it's sweet. So, because if we shy away from the things we don't like, the things that make us feel pain, the things that we're afraid of, we might experience a type of a peace, I suppose, but we never grow. And is it a type of a peace? Because we're living in fear. Anything might rattle it at any time. The only way that we'd be able to do that is if we isolated ourselves completely. And even then, we'll introduce other troubles into our lives. So the peace and calmness must come from confronting as well as from sitting quietly in meditation, rather than isolating ourselves from that which makes us feel fear. In science, studies of stress and studies of the telomeres, that parts of DNA which control, well, are related at the very least to aging and stress. And they get shorter and shorter as we get older. But evidence shows that stress makes them get shorter faster, and that in some circumstances, people can even shift their whole approach to stress, to eating and everything else that makes them stop getting shorter and perhaps even occasionally get longer, apparently. So we can, whatever we measure that as, not about having to live too long, but rather understanding that it is our minds that are in control of whatever affects us. So approaching our fears, the pain tastes icky until we see that it brings us the reward of tapping into our infinite potential. In Yogananda's words, we burn ourselves in the fire of mortal experience so that our divine immortality, which is buried beneath the dross of our consciousness, may once again be revealed. So we need to go through a bit of that pain and suffering in order to achieve this consciousness, this spiritual resource that lies within us. When you are passing through the difficulties and tests of life, you'll often become angry and rebellious. Why is this happening to me? Why is it not the next person? It's not fair. Instead, Yogananda suggests that we should think of every trial as a pickaxe with which to dig into the soil of our consciousness and release the fountain of spiritual strength that lies within. We have probably all heard a version of something similar before. The challenges are what we need. The challenges, says Yogananda, must be thought of as a tool. One of the ways of changing our response to fear and challenge is to understand that it is supposed to be challenging. It is a tool that releases spiritual strength. The great poet Rumi says, "This discipline and rough treatment are a furnace to extract the silver from the dross. This testing purifies the gold by boiling the scum away. After all, if you are irritated by every rub, how will you be polished?" He says, "Burdens are the foundations of ease. Bitter things are the forerunners of pleasure." As that important story by Eknath Easwaran tells us, you only understand that the amla is sweet if you have been through its bitterness. True for many foods, true for many things in life. Of course, then, it brings us to how do we get there? How do we learn to approach things that way? Because we clearly have a response that is almost automatic, and we're in fear and anxiety and stress before we even know that we are. Yogananda says there is always a way out of your trouble. And if you take the time to think clearly, to think how to get rid of the cause of your anxiety instead of just worrying about it, you will become a master. So one of the things he teaches is to sit quietly, meditate, pray, achieve the calmness within, and then think of the alternate ways by which the problem can be solved or the problem can be eliminated. Ignoring problems won't solve them, but worrying about them won't solve them either. So sitting quietly and shifting our mind is the best option we have because, as you said, there is always a way. So one of the things to think about when we are approaching our problem is to think about, am I eating properly? Am I getting enough exercise? Am I sleeping enough? How's my breathing? Have I been stressed? Have I been feeling anxious? How's my focus? Have I been distracted? Have I been able to do my work? When we look at those things, we get a handle on ourselves. And if it is self-realization we are aiming towards, if it is calmness we are aiming towards, then we need to be in charge of ourselves. We need to be creating a best self. And by doing that, we create a confidence because we know that we're in charge. And if we're in charge, then we will do what we need to do. We will have what we need to have in order to handle whatever life might throw at us. So it's a calm kind of confidence that we seek. So when we're confronted by stress and the thing that causes stress in some way, the best thing to do is, where possible, not try and deal with it there and then, not try and solve the problem there and then. And understand that our initial response is frequently not worth anything. So although we might react by fear, and then we've got into this whole thing of what must I do about the fear, the best thing to do is say, okay, there's my react by fear. So that's the tool I'm going to use. Let me just put that aside. I'll get back to that pickaxe and develop some calmness. Sounds too good to be true, but it's really just a bunch of simple steps. Developing some calmness often means, okay, well, wait until tomorrow. Wait until tomorrow. It's such an important principle that we ignore, and some of you even think, right, oh yeah, if only I could just wait until tomorrow. But actually you can, because trust me, nothing's going to change between now and tomorrow, 95% of the time. No one's going to suddenly disappear. Whoever is causing the trouble is not going to come bashing your door down. They're not, whatever it is, no one's going to die. It's all going to still be there tomorrow. But the difference is that getting a good night's sleep, getting a chance to meditate for a bit, and meditate the next morning when you wake up before confronting the problem, rather than having the problem in the midst of your crazy day, as we know, it just makes it seem crazier. So we must create a space that says, I'm in charge, so I will deal with this, because my mind is more powerful than the problem. My mind is more powerful than the problem because my mind is God. It is what is connected. It is the omnipresent. So therefore, it is more powerful. When I attune to understand what it is, it doesn't mean I'm like someone who can walk around throwing fires and volcanoes like the gods of classical times. It really means I understand that consciousness is everything, that the divine consciousness and my own consciousness are the same thing. So therefore, my mind is more powerful than this problem. I might not be able to exercise the power as if I were God, but certainly approaching it with that calm inner confidence that meditation, as well as good control over sleep and body and eating, all those other things, that gives us the ability to solve the problem. Most importantly, not checking the emails, the smartphone, the millions of inputs that just make us all crazy and have a million things going on. So if you wake up in the morning, meditate, have a good breakfast or whatever it is as part of your morning ritual, do not check your emails, do not switch on your phone, sit quietly, after meditation, confront the problem. Talk to your inner self or your higher self or your angel or whatever it is for you, but don't talk to your email, your computer, and your telephone. That will profoundly change how you deal with it, because it locates the power of dealing with it in you. Yogananda says, the Sanskrit word for faith is wonderfully expressive. It is Vishwas. The common literal reading, he says, to breathe easy, have trust, be free from fear, doesn't convey the true meaning. In Sanskrit, Shvas refers to the motion of the breath, implying life and feeling. V conveys the meaning of opposite or lacking, without. That is, he whose breath, life, and feeling are calm will have faith born of intuition. It cannot be possessed by persons who are emotionally restless. The cultivation of intuitive calmness requires the unfolding of the inner life. When developed sufficiently, intuition brings immediate comprehension of truth. You can have this marvelous realization, meditation is the way. So faith, he said, is about having trust, being free of emotions, and breathing easy. It's such a powerful lesson, being free of emotions. We live in a world that says, own your emotions, learn to express your emotions. It's all about your emotions. I have the right to express my emotions. And while all of those things may be true, and they are, it distracts us from who we are, because emotions are things that we have. They're not things that we are. And self-realization is about who we are, understanding who we are. I am someone that has emotions. I am someone who has fear. But if I have it, I can put it aside. I can find a way to deal with it. It isn't me. It can't overpower me. I have it like a possession. And that shift helps us reach towards that realization. Yogananda says, meditate with patience and persistence. In the gathering calmness, you will enter the realm of soul intuition. Throughout the ages, those beings who attained enlightenment were those who had recourse to this inner world of communion with God. Go within the self. Close the door of the senses and their involvement with the restless world, and the divine will reveal the wonders to you. You find them within. It is, again, a simple path because it's right there in front of us all the time. The access to self-realization, the access to power is through ourselves, through our mind. And that's the thing that allows us to deal with anything that the world has to offer. Getting back to Eknath Eswaran, he says, few human beings are born with the skill to weather storms with stress and grace. But everyone can learn. We can't control the weather outside, but we can control how we respond. For it is in the mind that the storms of life really blow. What matters is not so much the turmoil outside as the weather within. To a person with an agitated mind, something as minor as a rude driver can cause enough stress to ruin a day. By contrast, I think of Mahatma Gandhi, says Eswaran, who gave himself away when he confessed, "I love storms." Gandhi began life as a timid child, but he learned to keep his mind so steady that he could face tremendous crises with courage, compassion, wisdom, and even humor. Just incidentally, one of the people who taught Gandhi those techniques was Paramahansa Yogananda. Eswaran goes on to say, the steadiness of mind is one of the most practical skills. Without it, no one can face the challenges of life without breaking. And life today is challenging, to say the least. We live in the midst of conflicts within ourselves, at home, in the community, even nationally and internationally. This is an age of conflict, says Eswaran, which makes it an age of anxiety as well. Nothing is more vital than learning to face this turmoil with confidence and compassion. So I'll remind us where we started, and that is that fear and the challenges of life and the stresses they bring are really all about not knowing who we are. When it seems that outside things want to overpower us, when it seems impossible, when it seems indeed it is something more powerful than you, the government, this situation at ESCOM, the corruption, all of these things which you are not in power over, and you aren't, but you are in power over how you respond. And by taking that inner journey to find your own calm response, you will find where you do have power. From the practical, if it were ESCOM, for example, the getting yourself off the grid is an example of how you are in power. But to the spiritual, we're realizing that all of these things are just pickaxes being given to me so that I might dig in the soil and find the gold and turn it into its pure form, which is the self, and realizing the power of the self. It's a journey. It's not an intellectual answer that says, oh, realize you have the power to do something about how you feel about Eskom or how it affects you. It's not a simple solution that says, here's the answer. The point, as I've made, is that we need to go within to find the answer, not without. Once you realize the solution to it all, the government, Eskom, the next door neighbor, that bad driver, the stresses of those emails, the solution of it all lies within. Meditation is the key. The within is the power that is unleashed when you follow that path.